All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. We're just a bunch of Kiss fans and we talk Kiss. So come along for the ride, you've got nothing to lose. All right, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Today I'm joined by a special guest, and I'm really shocked and embarrassed that I've not had you on the show previously to talk about your affliction, that you really love Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, and we're willing to do a book about it, one that has recently had a reboot, a revisit, which I know all about. But Ron, good to finally get to have you on the show and actually to meet you properly.
Likewise, I've always wanted to be on here. As you know, I'm a big viewer of this pod, so it's even better to, be on it.
Yeah, so what's prompted this visit is that you're putting out a revisitation of your seminal work on Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, which originally came out as Conversations with Phantoms long ago. So let's go back in time, because I look at the dates on those cassette tapes on the front cover of that, and you started that project a long, long time ago. What for you was the genesis of saying, I want to do interviews all about Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park? Was it something that afflicted you in your childhood that you needed to deal with?
I think yes, and that's the short answer. And the even longer answer is, I wanted to write Kiss. I wanted to write a Kiss something. And as you might recall, in the 90s, I used to write the Kiss Thought Vault, on Kiss Asylum, which was, one of our, deep dive kind of things where we'd go into the minutia and really explore things and also have a little bit of a sense of humor about it. And when you think of humor, well, Phantom really kind of fits the bill. And I've always been a major fan of 1978. I think when you really excise 1978 and look at it from January through December, it's got to be, well, if not the most jam-packed, probably the most amazing year in history, including Phantom, of course. But, it starts out normal. They're wrapping up the Alive 2 tour. Then they do this little hit-and-run Japanese thing. Okay, that's still kind of normal. And then, boom, they're going to film. Meanwhile, Double Platinum's on the record racks. The Mego dolls are hitting stores, the makeup kit. You're getting national ads for Double Platinum and those things. The success story of the decade. And you have all these things happening. You move into the summer after filming. Now they got to bang out the solo albums. That's mounting up. The movie airs. The albums are out a little earlier, of course. Ace's New York Groove starts to creep up the charts a little bit toward the end of the year. And you really do have what is, to me, the ultimate Gene, Ace, Peter, and Paul year in terms of those guys on your wall and just having the fun and just loving these superheroes just as we, love Star Wars and things like that.
So date yourself. Where were you as a Kiss fan in 1978 when Phantom airs and when the solo albums come out? And what have been your entry point into, becoming a fan of the band and them capturing your imagination?
My entry point was about late 76. A friend of mine at school was telling me about I Want You being an awesome song. And my mom got Rock and Roll Over, per chance, on 8-track in summer of 77. This box arrived, the million 8-tracks for a penny. And in there was Draw the Line. In there was some Fleetwood Mac, some Doobie Brothers. And of course, again, Rock and Roll Over, the rare orange shell 8-track, which I haven't been able to find since. Alex has it, by the way, in Germany. And
he has everything.
He will not part with it either. I've asked him, Alex, how you doing? I'll see you New Year's Eve. I just love that album, Rock and Roll Over. I didn't even know, that it was Kiss with makeup or anything. I would just ask her to put it on in her Cadillac, and I would just listen. So by the time Phantom came around, I had known about them through the likes of 16 magazine, things like that. And I was starting to put them on my walls. I had my first posters, and I started to get some vinyl. So Phantom was a big deal. It was right there as I was beginning to spend my allowance on Kiss things, and I had double platinum and Dress to Kill and things like that. So yeah, I was right there on the verge. I just turned 8 years old in 1978 when I watched it. So for me, it was I was the ground zero audience for it.
So you're 8 years old and you're watching it as it airs on, for the first time ever. What was your reaction as an 8-year-old to seeing this band whose album, I mean, Rock and Roll Over is quite a bit different than how they come across on the screen. How do you kind of correlate what you're seeing and what they're doing on screen with what you hear musically as you start to learn about their catalog?
Well, you're seeing Kiss moving. They're not static on a poster on your wall. So for me, it was an utter home run, 1,000,000%. My mom didn't want me to stay up. She had this Magnifox cool TV on a pedestal. It was all ornate and what have you. And she was having friends over, and that TV was in the rec room. And I'm like, I'm sitting here and watching this. And I planted myself in front of the TV. I thought it was great from beginning to Gene close up of God of Thunder live and the credits ending. And at the end, we had a burnt sienna colored plush rug in that room. And it was one of those rugs, Julian, you can draw it in. And I went with my hand and I made a huge, giant Kiss logo. And then my mother said, Ronnie, what are you doing? You got to go to bed. And I went to bed. Yeah, it was wild.
Had you seen any, video on TV or elsewhere of them performing live before you see those live sequences that they do in Phantom?
No, no, because we didn't get HBO around my parts until probably 81. A cousin of mine had it, and I remember seeing, of course, the HBO concert in 79. So, yeah, this was my first entry point exposure to Kiss Live.
That's amazing to consider. So going through all the years, did you stay a Kiss fan from that point on, or did you check out for a while before coming back in at any point during their career?
Never, ever wavered, never left the army, never went AWOL, Julian. I totally stayed with them, only more. I fought with kids during two-hand touch football in the neighborhood that Kiss didn't sell out because of I Was Made, in 79. I kept my mouth, I bit my lip with the older kids in the neighborhood that said Unmasked was terrible. And then I just I was the one talking when nobody was mentioning the elder at all. I stayed with it. And then, it was lean and mean those times, especially being a fan in America. And I'm sure this story I'm telling is similar to so many of us. And, I stuck with my band. And of course, everybody else, yeah, was getting into the new wave of British heavy metal. And then Motley came, and I was into all that. I was always into rock and roll. But no, Kiss was my band, and then by the time of Animalize, I'm a huge fan of Party Paul, as I call him at that time. And our guy was doing like a B, C level David Lee Roth there, but I loved it. For me, it was perfect, and the whole lineup with Eric and Bruce. I'm a major fan of European Animalize all the way through the whole Animalize tour. It should have never ended. They should have booked more dates. They should have booked Japan. They should have begged to be on Live Aid. They should have begged to play for free. If they did 4 songs on Live Aid, Julian, if they came out and did Detroit, Rock and Roll Night, Heaven's on Fire, and Lick It Up, they would have been the surprise of the day. A 1985 Kiss playing. I mean, Priest played.
Yeah.
And I know they were British, but Kiss had some connections with MTV and stuff. They should have pushed for it. But yeah, all the way through Asylum, I love the Asylum era album and tour. And after that, I always got the album's day of release. I always stayed with them. And in the neighborhood, maybe we didn't like the albums as much after a while, but we would never say that to outsiders.
Oh, yeah.
Never.
Of course.
Never. No, like Bang Bang You is amazing. as far as to outsiders. No, 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 amazing.
Yep.
But yeah, things started to creep in, and then I discovered things like the Ramones, and that kind of changed me musically a lot. But I no, man, Kiss all the way through, all the way through.
So the advent of the internet era changes a lot for many of us. Obviously, as you mentioned at the top, talking about the thought vault, the features
Yeah,
at
yeah.
Kiss Asylum. I mean, back in those early days of the internet, the sites like Otaku and Asylum were great for people who wanted to be creative and to express themselves. So you start doing that. When you start planning out, when did you commit to saying, I want to try and do a project on the Phantom? What was the moment that made you decide, I'm going for this? I'm going to put together a list of people. And how did you approach planning out trying to do that project? Was it just going through the credits or writing every name down and then thinking about how you were going to get in contact with them and then persuade them to do an interview about this movie?
Awesome, awesome, loaded question. Uh, back in those days, I just sat around and I'm like, I had Attack in like '85 or '86. By the way, I had Attack of the Phantoms, and that kind of stuck with me. And it's funny, Attack, the edit, and the TV edit, they kind of cancel each other out. Neither is really superior. In Attack, yeah, it's a little more serious, but who wants serious? You lose all of Ace, basically.
Yep.
You lose all the punchlines there. And while the solo albums strangely fit, like they really fit, like 9 times out of 10, I liked the goofy music and stuff. Again, I was a kid seeing it, it was fine. But I wanted to write, and I had done some stuff, and I had. I'm trying to think. I almost interviewed Paul back in like '95, '96. I missed phone calls from Paul Stanley 3 times in one day on a landline. I have his voicemail somewhere on micro cassette, and I missed him when they did the convention tour. I was going to interview him for a local paper, so I was trying to think about like writing about Kiss stuff again, the Thought Vault, and I'm like, I want to do a book. What would it be? And right at that time, Julian, I had gotten all of the dubs of Attack. I
Oh,
had the
really?
Italian, yeah, I had the Italian one. I had everything. I had the Australian one. That's a joke. But so I was like, it just kind of rekindled. And there I was in teacher college. I'm a teacher by day, and I said I'm going to write about Kiss Meets the Phantom. So in teacher college, I started writing notes, and yeah, I started watching the credits, and I knew of Barry Levine. And then it just kind of, I was off to the races. I'd pick a name and see who I could get. Internet Movie Database had just launched. You can get some names from there. And it was really hard. You'd call up the local operator in the Santa Monica area and see if
Right.
you have an Anthony Zerbe or whatever. And I just did it that way. And as it went on, I started getting these interviews and jumping ahead. While I did them, I felt I got to a place where it could be a book, Julian, where there
Right.
was a story emerging. In all seriousness, I had Bill Acoin. And Bill and I hit it off, Bill Acoin, we used to talk on the phone for a while. We became friendly. And, if he were still around, I'm sure we'd still be friends today. That was awesome. And that really gave me one slice of it. Then, still from the Kiss side, I had Chris Lent, CK Lent. And then on the movie production side, I had Terry Morse and Deke Hayward and Gordon Hessler. And between the three of them, I essentially had 3 different stories.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. And then on screen stuff became a little tricky. I had engaged in a series of phone calls with Anthony Zerbe's agent at the time, faxes, and it just didn't click. And then finally, he just turned it down politely. And I'm like, okay. But what else stands out about the movie? Michael Bell being a voice artist.
Right.
I have to get him, because I don't know. I look at Peter in the movie, and I think you know that I'm a big, big Peter Criss fan. And I estimate Peter to have done a fine performance acting wise in that. I think his body language and everything kind of matches
Mhm.
the dialogue. And in spite of him being overdubbed, I think he's the best Kiss actor in the movie. Paul is like a polar opposite of his stage persona in that. Although his dancing, when they're walking under the roller coaster, they're going to go 5 before they fight the cybernetic creatures, is amazing. But yeah, so I kind of of went to a point where I had enough, again, of a story. There's something here for people to read. Would people read it? And I felt they did. And then, Julian, life happened.
Yep.
And, I had my son, Nick, and then my daughter, Sophia, was on the way. And, I was school teaching, and my business, my children's entertainment business, was taking off. And, you just kind of lose interest. And all those interview cassettes you mentioned on the cover went in a Nike sneaker box and just went into the basement. But I made one mistake. I made one big mistake doing this. I told everybody I was writing a book. I put out a
Exactly.
press. I learned my lesson. I put, and I, not only that, but I poured it on, Julian. I said, it's going to have this, it's going to have that. So people were excited because there was such a naivete about Phantom at the time. This is only 2000 when I started it, and I went as far as early 2003. All the people I'd call, when I called Barry Levine, you're doing a book about this? Why? You know what I mean? Or and then other people would be like, you are? Like, people were really shocked. When I talked to Lisa Persky, Dirty D, and we talked a few times as well, and really hit it off. She was just genuinely surprised and pleased, to be able to talk about it. And so again, it kind of went, and then I kind of just put it away, and those cassettes were just sitting there, and every now and then I'd get an email, hey dude, are you putting this thing out, what's going on, and it just kind of stopped at that point.
Yeah, the moment you mention that you're working on something, the emails start, and then they trickle. They slow down to a trickle if you keep working. If it's going
Yeah.
and taking a lot longer, but you're absolutely right. The biggest mistake you can make is talking about what you're working on, unless it's something where you have to talk about it because you need people's help. What was the impact of something like Kiss and Sell came out in 1997, and Chris Lentz spoke about the Phantom in there.
Yes.
They'd spoken about the Phantom in Kisstory, which comes out in 95.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Those sorts of things. And are they driving you? You're seeing little bits and pieces now coming up out about that Phantom movie. It's attained a cult status outside of the Kiss Army with its
Yes.
kitsch, and it's really something greater in kind of B movie land, I guess. I don't really know how to describe it, because there's a following for that sort of movie much greater than just within the Kiss Army.
Yeah, and that's what I forgot to mention that, because I liked that piece. I liked that it was a good bastion of 70s pop culture, and there's a lot of talent attached to it as well. That were, Carmine Caridi was in a lot of different things, from The Godfather to doing, a TV series. These were people, again, Anthony Zerbe had his own series for a while. These were people that were big. Gordon Hessler had a following. These Hanna-Barbera. Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a pop culture crossroads, man. These people are all rallying around our guys. That blew me away. And as far as Kiss and Sell, that was a big influence on me as a writer. I really liked the way he made no bones about it. It's his viewpoint, Chris. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And he'd tell you that, that was his viewpoint, what he saw. And he understands that he wasn't in the hot seat, that things affect you differently when you're actually in Kiss. You
Yes.
know, he got that. He knew he had a bird's eye view, but from a certain perch. And he wrote his stuff with some dry humor in there, and I really like that as a writer. I like to entertain as well as inform, and Kiss and Sell for me really hit that sweet spot. And I still go back to that. I still pour through that and take a look at that book. I love that. And then I also thought that later on, Lydia's book was really well done. I felt like that was almost like a love letter to her life in a way, how she presented everything in a timeline. And I thought that's the basis of a Kiss movie. I thought that is the story of Peter and Lydia. I thought somebody should write that screenplay. That's a Kiss movie to me, of the earliest days of them being together, struggling, Peter struggling to make it, and then, getting into Kiss. And, I just think it would have been great. But
A
yeah,
rock and
so
roll love story for the Hallmark Channel.
yeah,
60, 60,
right.
78, you know?
I really thought so. That's what I thought. And so yeah, I hope I answered your question. By the way, I don't know if I did
Yeah,
such a good
yeah, you
job
did.
there.
And it's great to hear, the love for Chris Lent and Kiss and Sell, because I think he really hit the bullseye with that book because,
Yeah.
number one, his objectivity and his transparency, and that this is my memory of events. It may differ from,
Right.
other people. And to this day, that still very often tops people's lists of all-time favorite Kiss books. So I think that has solidified its success. But let's go back to your book and have all of the interviews that were originally featured in the Bear Media version come. Are they all contained within the new revisit that you're doing with Elaine?
Yes, yes. Everything is essentially the same. And speaking of Bear Manor Media, that was kind of a funny story because, I had these cassettes sitting and, every now and then people would ask. And I was approached by a couple different people that maybe wanted to do something with my material in different projects and stuff. And I don't know. I just always said no. And one day I walked by that box and I said, I should try to find a publisher. The days of self publishing were nascent in 2017, 2018 still. And although Libris was out there and there were ways to do it, I didn't feel confident enough to do it. I just wanted to get these interviews out. And I got in touch with Bear Manor Media, and I'm all excited to call. It's like a little pop culture imprint. Julian, if you were a second or third sheriff deputy on Dukes of Hazzard, and you wanted to write your book about that experience, he would publish it.
Right.
Maybe you were a voiceover guy again and had your story. He'd put that out. So I get in touch with him, and he's like, "What? Kiss?" I go, "Yeah, I have a Kiss book." He goes, "It's not really my thing. I don't think it's going to sell." I said, "Ben, his name is." I said, "Why don't you do a little research on your own and get back to me? I think it'll be your biggest book of the year." So sure enough, he got back to me and he said, "Let's do this now." So I said, because, again, it's 2017, 2018. We originally talked. And again, print media is selling even more back then. You're almost a
Right.
decade ago. So he says, "Let's do it." And that's when I started putting it all together. And yeah, all the content is the same. In the years in between doing the interviews, I lost a couple tapes. I think there was a little more material with Bill Coyne, and I think there was a little more material with someone else I just thought of recently in rereading this book. But that's not to say there's anything lacking again in it. But yeah, everything is the same. But you know what? I went over it. I gave it two full edits. I know Elaine went over it and went over too, and we formatted it differently so it reads better. This new book is it's full color, glossy. If any of you don't know what Elaine Belicia does, and yes, I also murdered that name too just now. Alan Belisha, I think it's closer, but no guitar. And he does these, great boutique books. And this is actually your fault, Julian, now that I think about it, because he took your Casteria
Yep.
and redid it, which, you know what? He took your original Casteria, sir, and did like an enhanced version of it.
Yeah, he totally gave it a facelift. He found a few things in there. He did an absolutely incredible job with Mascaster. I was very impressed. And when he approached me to do mine, I was like, heck yes, because I'm so closely connected with everything that I do that I wanted that third party perspective. But how did you get connected with Elaine in order to do this?
So on the heels of your project, I reached out to him and I was thinking about my book, and I always wanted to maybe do an audio version of it or do something else because when it did come out, I managed to get the interviews together. And I'm a writer and an editor, so I managed to do it. I took that photo of the cover of literally the cassettes. I just wanted to get it out. And, I finished it during the pandemic, and I finished it actually, candidly. I had a lot of stuff going on in my life, and the fact that I got that out was amazing. But I did want it to be a little more. you know. And after Elaine put out his Phantom book, Demons of Rock,
Yep.
Meet the Phantom, I believe it's called, I said, wow, we could really join these two together. And he's got, all the lobby cards and things like that, and really bring this to life. And like you said, give it a fresh coat of paint. And I'll do a fresh edit on it. And he came up with the magazine type of layout for it, the format, and the cover is straight up Tiger Beat, Teen Beat. It's fun. And Elaine's got that sense of humor, especially something like this, with Phantom. You know what I mean? Like, it's got the lighthearted approach, and yet the meat of the story is there about Phantom behind the scenes, from the Kiss perspective, from the network perspective, and from the production team perspective, as well as on screen too.
Right. I mean, he's definitely got an aesthetic that goes with everything that he
Yes, he
does.
does. Yes, yes.
And you can always tell when it's a Kiss in Japan, Elaine work, because it's got that fingerprint. And
Yes.
again, I like what he brings into these projects, because he usually thinks of something, and has an angle that just
Another good
isn't.
one here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So he always brings something in, whether it's his own stuff, it's like stuff I've never seen, or things that I've never thought
Yeah.
of. So going back to these interviews, did you do the transcriptions on these yourself?
Yes.
Oh
Yes,
my
I
God.
did absolutely everything.
Please explain to everyone out there in TV land, because
Yes.
when Tim was doing all of the interviews for the solo albums, and the Novelda feature, he
Love
did
those
all those.
books.
What people don't realize is he did all of those transcriptions manually. They
Yes.
predated the ability of tools, which I use to stream, to speed up the process. How did
Right.
you do yours, and how torturous a process was it?
First of all, hearing your voice from about 20 years ago was a little tough. I hate listening to myself.
Oh yeah.
I'll watch this podcast though. I think it'll be great, but the volume will be off. Only when you talk, I'll turn up. But I think I found it. I found one of my cassette players, Julian, and I did it myself because I wanted to listen to the nuances, and it helped me get the memories back. Deke Hayward was so happy to speak. And I did it in the living room of his house. And I think I mentioned this in a book, but he invited me to his house up in Zuma Beach. So I'm driving up the Pacific Coast Highway, and then I'm going up these twisty, foldy roads, and I'm going all the way to the top to a gate. And Mamadi Mama, this is Ron Albanese. I'm here to meet DK. Come on up. The gate opens. I drive up even higher, and his house is glass walls, floor to ceiling in this room. And you're looking at one side, and you just see the Pacific Ocean. And you look the other way, and you see the mountains. You see trees and everything. So I'm sitting there. All right, where is this guy? All right. And all of a sudden, I hear a voice on the steps, and he's like, my wife prefers the view of the trees. I like the view of the ocean. And it was Deke Hayward. And he puts out some wine, he puts out some snacks, and we get to talking Phantom. But at the time he was recovering, he had a stroke actually about a
Oh, really?
month before this. And unfortunately, Deke left us soon after that. So, I appreciated the interview, and he had such gusto and brio about talking about it that in transcribing, I had to go to the cassette. Yeah, I looked at software, Julian, but to me, I'm old school. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the pauses. I wanted to hear me, how I went question wise, in what direction to really properly convey the whole interview. I thought that was paramount in doing this.
Oh, you have to. I mean, even to this day, I use automated tools to do all my transcriptions, but then I have
Yeah.
to sit back and listen to the thing to really finesse the nuance that you can only get by listening back to that. And especially if you've been away from the interview for a long period of time.
Right. Right.
I think you touch on one other important thing that I just want to take a tangent on briefly, is that the people who are interviewed that are no longer with us. I mean, I'm working on a project currently, and I think we're up to 4 people who have now passed on since those interviews were done, and the project's not even out. So you're really capturing a moment in time. Let's go through the interview list.
Sure.
I'm just going to read the names of these folks. Some people will know, but if you just want to give a quick overview for each one of these people who are featured
Sure.
in the work and how they fit into the picture. I don't think we need to go over Bill Aucoin and C.K. Lenz again, as we talked about them, but capturing the look. So this is Barry Levine and James Halsey, who are both. I mean, people should know at least one of those.
Okay. So Barry Levine, and he was quite the ball buster in plain North Jersey English when I had called him. But we had talked on the phone a lot at that time, and it was a little weird though because he was working with Gene at that time. So he'd be like, "All right, I'm going to talk to Gene. Maybe he'll talk to you, or let me let him know." And I'm a little leery of that because I don't know what direction it's going to go in.
Mm-hmm.
And so sure enough, he did talk to Gene, and it helped me know that Gene didn't have the rights to the Phantom photos that Barry Levine took at the time. What was that, Ron? Well, Barry Levine was the exclusive on-set photographer. And as we've seen in years since these things have surfaced online, it's a treasure trove of photos from the Phantom shooting, acting, candids, all the Gene stuff, just amazing stuff all around. Absolute pinnacle of Kiss, and Levine shot it well. And so yeah, talking to Barry Levine was kind of cool because he was also such a rock and roller, and hung out with the guys and was close with Paul. So his interview is really cool. You mentioned James Halsey. Now Halsey was one of the art guys. He was involved in the set design. And I'll never forget, he called me back. I was given a private tour of Magic Mountain when I first went out there. I took 2 trips to California, and I stopped at like a Hardee's or something on the way out. And he called me back on my little Sprint flip phone, and we started talking about it. And he went into some good detail as well in there about the set design and what he liked and stuff. And his recollections were surprisingly really cool. He was one of the first interviews I did where the guy wasn't a Kiss fan, or wasn't, again, connected to Kiss. So he was telling me about the job he did on this project, and he reviewed it and did his homework before he spoke to me. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a question of, Julian, like you might run into as a journalist or any of us, that interview people. Oh, wait a minute, I should go watch that again. And when we talk again, I'll let you know. You know what I mean? He came ready to go, and gave me some cool information.
Yeah, he was the art director, wasn't he?
Yeah, something like that, right? And
Yeah.
it's a bigger title than you think. Like it entailed a lot more. That's what I realized in
No,
speaking
because
with
that was your first question: is what is that, and what do you
him.
do? And that's what I love about it. But I very much respect that any interviewee that has revisited what you're going to be talking to them about just changes the dynamic of that interview so much by
Oh yeah,
refreshing their
yeah.
memory of it. All right, then I'll start. And I don't know if you've kept these same heading sections for the revisit, but Jan Michael Sherman and Don Boudet,
Boudet.
Boudet.
Boudet. The script writers, that was fantastic because both of those guys were filled with such energy and excitement to talk about it. And they were a team in the 70s, and they were trying to get projects going, and they were doing little things, and they had done a couple spec scripts and everything, and they had this gig. And to do this gig, you got to hang out with Kiss a little bit. Oh, how terrible they have to hang out with Kiss, when Cheap Trick is opening for them. My God, if I could go back in time, um, and so they talked about that, and then they talked about things, and this is where something important comes up that I feel is something to note for Kiss fans that want to know more about this movie. They, as the script writers, when you write a script, I have friends that have done stuff, that have scripts purchased and stuff. You're not really wanted on set. If this thing is going to be filmed, they're just buying your story. Here's your check. See you later. You can't show up and say, "Hey, how about changing this or doing this?" And invariably, it goes through a process where things are going to evolve and be done differently for the visual format. So these guys were talking about things, and one of them goes into how he feels it should have been a little more of a darker film, a little more day. If they shot more day for night, which is a big thing you see in 70s television, shooting day for night. It never looks like nighttime when they shoot day for night and stuff. And that was something I filed away and came back to later with other Phantom folk. And that kind of also painted the picture of how people felt from different angles about the project. Wow, that looked really
Right.
cool when I did that. Look at that. Look at that. Dude. Yeah.
Oh, look, you're still here, watching or listening. We're not sponsored, monetized, or supervised. We're only in this for subs and likes and kicks. So why don't you mash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about today's episode. Yeah, Don.
Oh, so yeah, basically they were both the same way. They weren't two guys that wrote, but wrote differently and then kind of made it meld together. They were on the same page, no pun intended, about writing the script and having the fun. They weren't too much older than Kiss at the time. And I believe it was maybe it was Don Boudet who expresses in the book that he thought that this was going to be a perennial. This movie was going to be on every Halloween. This would be like another Rocky Horror thing, maybe. And he has a point. He has a point. But alas, it just didn't happen.
Well, it was on quite a lot on TV. If you look through the TV guides online these days,
Yeah,
it's actually been shown a lot more, which really, to me, in my mind, cements a little bit more of that, cult factor for the film. So it may not have
sure.
made it back onto NBC in a regular, reoccurring type thing, but it certainly was never erased, thankfully.
No, it did turn up. I mean, and I think the biggest viewing out of that was what? Was it New Year's Eve or 85, right? It ran. And I remember me and my buddies watching it. I remember us just totally watching Phantom and being into it. I think it was around that time. And yeah, so it didn't totally go away. And in those days, we just didn't know. Me, a kid in North Jersey, I didn't know that it was still being shown around the world or around different markets, even in the U.S.
Yep. All right. So the movie makers: Terry Morris, Deke Hayward, you've mentioned, and Gordon Hessler. I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
Who was Terry?
So Terry Morse was the exec. No, Deke Hayward's the executive in charge of production, and Terry Morse was kind of like a producer, and he was a movie guy. He was a guy that delivered projects, and he was working with Hanna-Barbera, and he had done a couple other projects, and his memory was razor sharp on this in terms of numbers, in terms of getting it done, in terms of speed to get this on the air, and he finally remembers it too. And so with him, with Deke, you get a bit of the excitement of meeting Kiss and working with Kiss. And I might be messing up some of these memories exactly in terms of their roles. Yeah. Thanks, Julian. I
That's
was waiting for
perfectly
you to
okay.
save me.
That's why I write stuff down. I can't keep things straight,
I know, I just blew that. But what you get from the three of them are three distinct memories. Deke Hayward just loved it, and Deke Hayward's a guy that was working with Vincent Price. Deke Hayward after this did the Legends of the Superheroes roast. He understood camp. And, maybe to a fault, you know what I mean? Because this wasn't supposed to be a straight camp film. But he got that and he really enjoyed that part of it. Terry Morris looked at it as, taking these rock and rollers in and getting a movie out of it. I mean, it was such a special time. As a side note, you were never going to see Foghat meets the Phantom,
No.
or even later, Tiger Tails meets the Phantom, which I would have liked, by the way, if that
And
happened.
even stretching Aerosmith's, cameo really in Sgt.
Oh,
Pepper's into a full length feature. You're not going to do because
right.
they'll be on the floor in no time.
The closest you get is Rock and Roll High School.
Mm.
That's the closest you get with the Ramones because they had that cool, hood thing going on, like Four Fonzies or whatever. But they were also cartoony, So that's the
But
closest you
they
get.
were way closer to the Beatles in that kind of aesthetic, where you could put
Yes,
a silly movie around them because of the
right.
personalities and the characters of each one of those guys. Absolutely amazing.
The only other band I would throw into this, I don't know if you're going to agree, was maybe Cheap Trick.
Yeah,
Maybe Cheap Trick.
with
You know
the
what?
right concept, they've got the characters for each one of those original members.
And if you see things like their videos for Dream Police and stuff, where they do the slapstick bit, they had a little of the Bowery Boys in them. Maybe they could have pulled it off. But I don't mean them meeting the Phantom necessarily. Maybe them being in rock and roll high school, I guess. But
Certainly in some sort of similar
yeah,
property. And then we get into the actors. Carmen Creedy, you've mentioned Don Lewis, Mary Kay Morris, Michael Bell, and Lisa Jane Persky. I think you mentioned Lisa earlier, but just go through the cast of
sure.
characters there.
Well, Carmine Caridi really liked it, and this is when everybody reads the book, it's really interesting because Carmine Caridi really enjoyed the project, really thought some of the scenes were strong, and just loved Kiss, particularly Gene. Then when I spoke to Gordon Hessler, going back, Gordon Hessler, at one point questioned something that Carmine Caridi said that I bring up in his interview, and he actually is pretty strong about it. And this goes back to double checking that cassette. And he was like, well, what kind of role was that anyway? He was playing Carmine Caridi. Like, you get these strong opinions that were coming out. And in re-editing the book, I saw this story really after having a break from the book that really paints the different angles happening here from a director standpoint to an actor. So you also mentioned Lisa Persky. Lisa and I hit it off. She's like a New York punk girl. And, we were talking about, Blondie. She was dating a guy from Blondie at the time, and she loved the Ramones. So we hit it off that way. Total New York humor. And I hadn't seen her. Short story, one of the next to last Kiss conventions in Jersey, I had dropped someone off there, and I had to leave to go do a gig. And I'm like, man, I need some coffee. So I'm standing in line in a hotel coffee shop, and I hear someone ordering ahead of me. They say, yeah, I'll have a coffee. And I'm like, Lisa, is that you? I'm Ronnie Albanese. I interviewed a bunch of times. She's like, oh my God, yeah, how you doing? And that was like in 2016 or something. And she gave me her email and she said, you better finish that book. And so that's a true story. She's awesome, and she's done a lot of different things. And on screen, though, I got to say the interview with Don Lewis is really cool because Don was part of a troupe that could do different characters, and he was a working mime. And the use of the Universal characters in this movie is very surprising. You're talking about a licensing landmine, I guess, because it was the 70s, or maybe it just didn't go noticed. But you have a cast of characters literally in the Chamber of Horrors there, and Don Lewis was there as the Hunchback of Notre Dame,
Yep.
and I think he played a couple other things as well. So his stories were really good as too.
Yeah, I think the broad spectrum of people that you bring together for this, without being the whole kitchen sink, really does, a great part of telling the story of
Yeah.
Kiss Meets the Phantom. As much as I'm sure there's a dozen or more people that you would have loved to have been able to include in the book, but
Yes.
by the sounds of it, it worked out how it was supposed to work out. When people pick up the new revisit, I want you to cherry pick of any of those interviews. What do you think, or which one do you think people should read and pay particular attention to without telling them why?
I think there's one. I'm gonna go. There's one nugget that always just blew my head off, and I think it's in the Terry Morse interview that came out, and I was like, "Whoa!" And that is one, and two. As a Kiss fan, really go through the Bill Coyne interview, and I think you'll tease out how much he loved each and every one of the guys and how committed he was to it. And as the interview goes on, I think you get more of Bill's brain. You get that behind the scene management bit where he wanted to take this and he wanted it to go. Now, whether or not that was a good move for the band overall, that's not the point. But you hear What a management guy. Okay. Basically, he's in business and where he wanted to take this, what he wanted to see happen. And I think it's just a fascinating look behind the curtain, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's basically my questions, Ron. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, just a couple things. I believe the pre-orders now are sold out. I believe it is sold out. Anybody could also, double check and go to Elaine's website, which is what, Kiss on Tour
Look in the
73
link.
to
Look in the
83.
link below for the correct link because I always get it wrong.
But check with him. I believe it's totally sold out. We were floored with the response, and I did want to do conversations with Phantoms too. And you mentioned other people I wanted to speak to. I had finally gotten in touch with the lady who played Melissa, and I actually hooked her up to do the commentary on the Kissology DVD.
Really?
That's
That's
how
very
that
cool.
happened. I hooked all three of them up. I said Don Lewis would be great with information. Carmine Caridi wanted the gig badly, and I got her to do that one. So I remember, I think it was Roger Coletti, not Alex, that was out in California, and he was supposed to be going to her house. And she's calling me. I'm at the Jersey Shore, and she's saying, "Where is this guy? Where is this guy? I got to go to work." And he was going to her house or meeting her somewhere to do the commentary. But I probably would have gotten her for a second book, and I think Anthony Zerbe would have caved in and done it. And
He's still
finally,
he's still
yeah.
around. There's still a chance.
And yeah, and on the flip side of that, Julian, I had spoken to Ace a little bit about it.
Mm.
He was aware of it, and I don't know if it'd be something he'd want to sit down and do some in-depth interview, but I was hoping to maybe get a forward from him or something like that at some point. If any Kiss guy was going to talk to me about it, I feel Ace probably would have because, as you know, I did a couple projects with him and stuff, and he felt
Well, you
comfortable.
did liner notes for Origins Volume One, didn't you?
I think, was it Origins? I did the picture disc for Anomaly,
Right.
which was Ace gave me a lot of great material. If anybody loves that record as I do, if you haven't read those liner notes, he did some really good information about that. He had a lot of heart in that record. I'll tell you, and that was great. And when I called him, he kept disconnecting because he kept walking around. He was like in a high floor at the Hard Rock in Vegas. And he's like, "I'm walking around." And I said, "Ace, how about staying still? Because you keep disconnecting." So, and then later on, and this is dovetailing a little bit, Julian, but I got to direct him in a little ad for Target. That was for the Origins record.
Right.
And that was by way of the great Ken Gullick, who worked with Ace for a long time. Ken, another guy I'll see on New Year's Eve. Ken and I have done a lot of cool things together. And you want a little short story about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's a
Anything with Ken.
Yeah, I know, right? He's so cool, man. Ken, wow, his passion about the Ace thing. I ended up helping Ace at a few signings he did for Spaceman, even Space Invader, and but so the ad needed to be done. And Ken had gotten John Five to do his clip, Bruce, some people, other fans around the country and stuff. And he said, "Ron, can you wrap this up by getting, working with Ace and taking care of this?" I said, "Okay, awesome, dude." Ace lived about 20 minutes away from me. So he's like, "Okay, but listen, here's the problem." It was like Thursday or Friday. He's like, "I need this by Tuesday. We need this. This is going into Target. You're under Target deadlines, let alone record company. They got to put this ad together. The heat is on." So he goes, "Now listen, you could handle this, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, no problem. Got it." He's like, "Okay, I'm going to hang up. Ace will be calling you in a little bit." I said, "Sure, no problem." So I hang up with Ken. Ace calls me. "Ron, I can't be there tomorrow." I said, "What?" No. Now I'm like Ralph Cramden. I'm like humming, 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 humming. And I'm like, "What's the matter?" He goes, I'm getting a Jaguar. And I go, that's awesome. I go, my daughter has a Jaguar. They're great players. He goes, he goes, not a guitar, a car. He goes, I'm going out. I'm flying out to Kentucky and I'm driving it back in. He goes, but listen, I said, listen, we're really, and not to mention Animalize, but under the gun here. I said, we got to get this done. The record company needs. He goes, no problem. We'll get it done. I'll see you, whatever. So he went and got the car and came back. And I met him at the Rockaway Mall Target over here. And he's calling me. I'm like, where is this guy? He's calling me. He's like, Ron, where are you? He goes, where are you? I go, Ace, you're coming straight at me. He was in his truck and he was like driving straight at me. And it was a Cadillac. It was like an Escalade. And at the time I had a black Lincoln. And I said, park next to my Lincoln. He got a kick out of that. But after that, working with him, Ken had a great vision for that, the whole come on thing with the card. And it really came together, but it was so under the wire. It was so ace. Looking back at it, it was so ace. We walked into Target and somebody said, you got to put your mask on because, this is the days of masks. He's like, I hate
Yep.
wearing this thing. It was really a good time. But I'm going to throw one more thing at you, if I could, Julian. And it's not about Out of Control, which we both agree is an amazing record.
Good.
But yes,
I don't
absolutely.
have to hang up on you.
Oh, dude, listen, where Kiss Online, where are the Out of Control bundles? Let's go, I mean, listen, I love that record. And You're My Girl should have been on it. But what was I going to say? Oh, here's my other idea. I'm going to listen, you're a guy, um, Elaine Belicha, Julian Gill, Ken Sharp. All you guys are always doing these awesome, cool books. And so I thought the conversations thing would become a little bit of a series. What if I did conversations with runaways?
Hmm.
Wow. Okay. You didn't shoot it down right away.
Hmm.
Conversations with runaways. I could
Now,
probably make a Tom Selleck. There's so many actors in there. It's a Michael Crichton movie.
right.
Okay, it's an underground. You talk about a cult classic. That Runaway does have that cachet as well.
It totally does.
Gene's acting is such a greatest hits of all his makeup stuff. It's unbelievable. When he's standing under the water fountain, he's doing the 1975 blood spitting routine, basically. It's so good.
It's one of
So,
his better movies, to be perfectly honest, because of how everything comes together in terms of the genre, the script, and who he's playing off
yes.
in those scenes. So to me, it's his best role.
Yeah.
Um,
Agree.
off the top of
Absolutely.
my head, anyway, I can't think of anything that comes close in terms of
Yeah,
what
I
came from.
think he's perfect in that. I think everything else is kind of flawed that he did. There are other moments that were good. A lot of fans like Want It Dead or Alive. But for me, Runaway is straight up. I think he nailed it. And I think that movie could be talked about a lot. And that's that. So I thought about doing conversations with runaways. I
Do it.
don't know.
Do it. Because if nothing else, if it doesn't become a book, you've got a few interviews that you can pitch to
Yeah.
fanzines or to various potential print outlets, so that they don't go to waste. Start with that. Start small. If it becomes a book, it takes a lunatic to start doing interviews before it. None of the stuff that we did for the FAQ with the solo albums or The Elder were ever intended to be books. They were strictly features that I
Right.
decided
Right.
and persuaded and strong armed into books and expanded on. They always started out as something else. So if you don't get everything, then you've still got material that is of interest to Kiss fans, and there
Sure.
are fewer and fewer unexplored angles
Yeah.
of things that haven't had the surface scratched that people might get a kick out of, and when you think about the Phantom having a cult standing, a lot of these movies have become, late night repeats that still pop up now and then. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
do a blog. If they don't become a book, they'll be out there for
Right.
posterity.
Now, also, you know what I have to do? Forgive my indulgence, but I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions about your recent works, um, because I loved Mask Hysteria. I just love it. Uh,
Thank you.
and then, yeah, no, it's really incredible. And oh God, and then the elder stuff that you and Tim did, and the solo about, oh my, just fantastic stuff. I await your 10-volume series again on Out of Control, but I'll be patient for that. But you know, you did actually cover it a lot in Mass Hysteria, which is great. Um,
That was
but
important, by the way, to make sure that Out of Control, because it's a part of that year, and Peter is central.
yeah,
He's a member of the business and a member of the band.
no
Uh,
doubt.
and,
Yeah.
and I did the same with War Machine for Let Me Rock You. Again,
Yes. Yes.
that's me imposing a little bit of my Peter Criss fanboy, but they legitimately fall into those works as well.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the only thing I have, this is another side note to the side note. The final mix of Out of Control could have been a little better. I think it's a little too rough around the edges at times for the material or for some of it. And it comes off as a little too aggressive, almost the way that Eat 'Em and Smile produces David Lee Roth's vocals a little too aggressive at some points. I think maybe some of the Out of Control stuff could have been a little softened and sounded a lot better. Although, as is, it's amazing, folks.
Yeah.
But you know what I wanted
Potentially.
to ask you? Here's something as a writer, when you put together, so Mask Hysteria, you know, wow, you know, the
Wait,
whole
wait, wait.
Europe.
Hold
Yes.
that thought.
Yeah.
You called me a writer. Thank you.
Oh, no, dude, you are. Are you kidding me? Oh, my goodness. So in the book, Mask Hysteria, um, you know, listen, Kiss is still riding high, even though they're losing money left and right. They still are in that certain thing where it doesn't really affect them super directly. They may know it on the outskirts, but they're just ignoring it and living life anyway. Through Europe, playing for 2,000 people in France or whatever, and, you know, going gangbusters in Australia, but, you know, behind the scenes, you know, maybe, you know, losing some money here and there. But by the time you got to War Machine, and this is no fault of your own, did you find War Machine to be a bit of a downer in ways when you looked at that whole Creatures era?
Absolutely. And that's, to a certain extent, it is. Yes, it's a downer, but also knowing that the elder had done such damage to them internally and within the industry, publicly, and with the label, and all the
Yeah.
drama going around with Ace and Vinny. There was drama.
Right. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
downer to see the results of their efforts, because Gene and Paul poured their heart and souls into making Creatures of the Night,
Yeah.
going through all those tribulations with an assortment of guitarists and songwriters, trying to do everything, showing that they had teeth, that they wanted to fight back, that they didn't want to just lie down and die,
Yep.
and cash in and let Kiss go, that they were both going to recommit to a common goal. And then they're playing to, Pizza Hut.
Yeah. They couldn't get a break. They couldn't get a break no matter which way they turned. Record sales, tour, MTV, whatever. They just could not get radio. They couldn't get a break. So when I read that on the heels of Mass Hysteria, you're reading about a drastically different situation, and that kind of stuck out to me. You know, that maybe not all the Kiss stories are like a rah rah joy kind of thing, but it's nonetheless a major part of the overall arc of this band.
It is, because whether you're raising your fist and yelling or going rah rah rah, it's the same energy. It's the same thing. You're
Yeah,
hoping. You're rallying. Again, the worst thing in life that you can do is sit back and surrender and give up.
yeah, yeah,
It's no matter how many times life knocks you down, you have to get up, even if you're just going
yeah.
to get knocked on your backside again. You have to keep fighting. You have to keep moving forward until the last breath. And it's not some vapid, empty clarion call. It really is about living, live to win. Paul
No, but you're
Stanley,
right, dude.
you know,
And that listen, that should be in a college course. Shout it out loud. Trial by fire. Get all you can take. These are things I've lived by. Are you kidding? I mean, I get. I'm not going to say it. All right, I'll say I get goosebumps sometimes listening to Trial by Fire. I believe Gene really was into that. He was into delivering that song, and he's like screaming his head off, singing. It's just awesome. I believe in all that for sure. And I love Gene's quote during Creatures, which is in the book, when he said, in doing some press, I say to hell with the bad times or something like that.
yep.
I love that. I love that. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you, as the guy, putting all this together, how it must have been a shock to see. Like, I don't think it ever stops being a shock. When you look at Kiss from 80 to maybe, late 83, it's just amazing.
Well,
Like this.
similarly, with Lick It Up, they do the same thing that they did the year before. They invest all that emotional energy, and now they've got Vinny as well, bringing a whole lot to that songwriting without having to go
Yes.
outside the band. And
Yes.
then they take the makeup off, and
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
it's just it's like raindrops in a pond. There's nothing.
I
Uh,
know.
they played their ace card and got very little reward for it immediately. Now, Animalize is when things start going right because they're fully invested in the mid '80s kind
Yeah.
of LA rock form.
Yes.
They're basically become a Motley Crue clone. Um,
Yeah.
by that
Yeah.
time, you get Doc and you get Rat, you get Kiss. They all look the same.
Right.
Sonically,
Oh, yeah. I know what to say.
MTV's taken off. So, again, Kiss never gave up. And that's what I respect about them. That's what keeps me excited about these albums and when we start investigating each one of them. But I want to
Sure.
give something back to you. You were talking
Okay.
about Ken Gullick and E1 and working on those projects. When I was invited to do the liner notes for Origins Volume 2, first thing I did was look at your liner notes and how you approach it,
That's
because I
cool.
wanted a certain amount of consistency between how you had approached
Cool.
doing it and how I was going to do it. I also needed some ideas to make sure that I'm covering
Mhm.
the sorts of things that I thought had worked very well with yours. So again, thank you for what you had put
Oh
into
man.
doing those, because again, I did use that energy when it came time for me to have a bite at that cherry with Ace as well. And what a great experience it was getting to work with him on
Oh
that.
yeah.
And
Oh
kudos to Ken, for
yeah.
inviting me in to do those.
Yeah, no, no. Ken was awesome about that, and he just had such a passion. It was way above and beyond, his position. He believed in the ace thing all the way, like with no let up ever. And regarding Ace too, the thing about Ace is like he got cooler every time I saw Ace. He was cooler and cooler every time. Like it was just a really good period in his life, and I was so happy to see that whole like second run there, from Anomaly forward, of this whole other library of music, and we got this, and he toured, and it was awesome to see all that. You'd be standing with him, and randomly he'd be like, "Do you like my jacket?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I like your jacket. It's a cool jacket, dude." Like things like that, He'd want to talk to you. He'd say, "So you're a school teacher, huh?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I teach and everything." And so things like that. And I mean, I've talked to Gene about that too, of course. When I worked on Tongue, uh, Gene and I had to talk for like 20 minutes, about school teaching. And that's all he wanted to talk about. Like he was just like straight up, just me, him on a loading dock waiting for his limo at an event. And he just wanted to talk about teaching. How is it? How long have you been doing it? I taught, right? And I'm like, "Oh yeah, dude, of course," and stuff like that. So I think when you get a chance to you know, be a part of these guys, little thing to cheer them on. It's just so. Luckily, it was always awesome.
Yep. Most people
Yeah.
aren't fanboying with these guys when they get the opportunity to really hang out with them. It is how, talking about other things, life. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there we go. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to, just join. Even though the book's sold out for now, check eBay. check Elaine's site to see if any other copies have become available, because sometimes people don't follow through with their orders. So there may be a few opportunities. But if not, regardless, it's still good to talk to you about this project, because it's a project worth talking about and getting, the
It's
author's
awesome.
perspective about how it was born and how it became what brought it back into the news currently. So thank you for taking the time to join me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the message board and discuss the topics we've broadcast today. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you've listened to this show, and a like would very much be appreciated. We hope you'll join us again, but until then, remember, life's a radio. Turn it up to 10.